I was born and raised in a little town in Wisconsin, where the winters are long and the people know each other's names for generations. Life was not fancy, but it was steady. My parents taught me the value of hard work, honesty, and keeping your word. We were not rich in money, but we were rich in spirit. And from the time I was a child, I had a dream that carried me through every season. You see, I loved making things with my hands. While other children played with dolls, I sat at the table with scraps of fabric, thread, and little tools, trying to bring something new to life. It could be a quilt, a small stitch design, or even a carved piece of wood. My joy came from creating something beautiful and useful, something that had a piece of my heart in it. By the time I was a teenager, I had notebooks filled with designs and ideas. Whenever I had a thought, I would draw it out, write it down, and imagine how it could be made real. Some of those ideas were small, like patterns for clothing, and others were bigger, like plans for machines that could make household work easier. I did not know then what people would call it in the bigger world, innovation or invention. But to me, it was simply the work of my hands and the gift of my mind. Now, in our family, there was always my cousin Clara. She was close to me in age, just 1 year younger, and because our mothers were sisters, we grew up together like sisters ourselves. Clara was pretty, lively, and charming. She had a way of drawing people in with her smile and her chatter, while I was the quiet one, always bent over my notebook or sewing machine. Clara was the one who loved parties, visitors, and being in the center of attention. I never minded that, because I thought we balanced each other out. I used to share everything with her. My dreams, my sketches, even my little stitched pieces. She would laugh sometimes and say, "Oh, cousin, you and your endless ideas. You'll fill the whole world with them one day." And I believed her laughter was kind, not mocking. When I finished school, I could not afford to go to college, though I longed to study design. Instead, I worked at the local fabric store during the day and came home to my sewing table at night. Every spare moment I had was spent developing patterns and stitching samples. Slowly, people in town began to notice my work. Neighbors would ask me to make them dresses for special occasions or quilts for weddings or embroidered curtains for their homes. It was not much money, but it was steady and it gave me pride. Clara, on the other hand, went off to college in Madison. She did not have much interest in studying, but she had the gift of talking her way through things. She visited often, though, and whenever she came home, she would stop by my room and look through my piles of sketches. "These are wonderful," she would say, flipping through them as if they were a magazine. Sometimes she would take a few, saying she wanted to keep them safe or show her friends. I thought nothing of it because she was my cousin, my own blood. Why wouldn't I trust her? But as the years passed, something began to shift. I noticed that Clara started dressing in clothes that looked remarkably like the ones I had designed. At first, I thought it was a coincidence. Then she began to talk about her ideas for fashion and home decor when she was around family friends. I remember once at a family gathering, she stood up and described a quilt design, word for word, the very design I had worked on the week before. People clapped and praised her creativity. I smiled politely, thinking maybe she was just proud to share what we had both grown up seeing. I told myself not to worry. Family was family. There was no harm in her taking a little shine. After all, I still had my work, my notebooks, and my steady customers in town. What did it matter if Clara liked to talk big, but deep down a small voice whispered to me that maybe she was taking more than I realized. That whisper grew louder the year she graduated from college. Clara announced she was moving to Milwaukee to work with a design company. I was surprised. because I had never known her to stitch a dress or cut a pattern. She laughed and said, "Oh, cousin, you know me. I can talk my way into anything." She hugged me tight and told me I was her inspiration. I felt proud of her, even if a little puzzled. It was not until months later that the real blow came. One afternoon, I was reading a magazine when my eyes fell on a feature about a rising young designer from Wisconsin who was making waves in the fashion world. The pictures showed Clara, smiling and radiant as always, standing beside dresses and quilts that looked painfully familiar. The article praised her for her fresh, original designs, quoting her words about how inspiration came to her in quiet moments of sketching late at night. My heart nearly stopped. Every pattern on those pages, every curve, every stitch was mine. I sat there trembling, the magazine shaking in my hands. The cousin I had trusted with all my dreams, the one I had shared everything with, had taken my life's work and claimed it as her own. That night, I could not sleep. I stared at my notebooks, stacked high with years of sketches, proofs of the work I had done. My mind went back over every time Clara had slipped a page into her bag, every time she had smiled at me and called me her inspiration. I had been blind with trust. She had not been admiring me. She had been stealing from me. And so, my dear, that was the beginning of the hardest chapter of my life. After I read that magazine, I sat frozen in my chair for a long while. It felt like the ground had been pulled from under me. Clara, my own cousin, was smiling out from glossy pages, praised for the work I had poured my life into. I kept thinking it had to be some kind of mistake. Maybe she had mentioned me to the writer. Maybe my name had simply been left out. My heart wanted to believe she would never betray me that way. But as I turned each page and read every word, my hope crumbled. There was not a single mention of me. Not one. She spoke as if those ideas had always been hers. She even described how she dreamed them up, painting pictures that I knew were stolen from my own nights bent over candlelight, sewing until my fingers bled. I could not eat that evening. My supper sat cold on the table. I walked around my small room, looking at the stacks of notebooks, each one a record of years of careful thought. I picked up one and flipped through the pages. The sketches matched exactly what I had seen in that magazine. My hands shook. A hot anger rose in me, but then it turned to sadness. How could Clara, who had shared childhood secrets with me, who had eaten bread at my table, betray me like this? For days I said nothing to anyone. I kept working at the fabric store, nodding politely to customers, stitching quietly in the evenings. But inside me, a storm was raging. Every time I picked up a needle, I wondered if my work would end up in her hands again. Every time I saw a dress pattern, I feared she would be out there, showing it off as her own. Not long after, the news spread further. Neighbors began to mention Clara with pride. "Did you see? She's becoming famous," they said. "She's putting Wisconsin on the map." I forced a smile, hiding the weight pressing on my chest. How could I tell them the truth, that those designs were mine, not hers? It sounded like jealousy. And in small towns, jealousy is often whispered about more than injustice. The hardest part came when Clara visited home that summer. She swept in with her fancy clothes and bright laugh, hugging everyone as if she were still the same girl we knew. When she hugged me, I stiffened. She pulled back and gave me a long look, as if she knew what was on my mind. Later that night, when we were alone in the kitchen, I finally gathered the courage to ask her, "Clara, I said, my voice trembling. Those designs in the magazine, they were mine, weren't they? You took them from my notebooks. For a moment, she looked caught off guard. Then she smiled, that easy, charming smile she always carried. Oh, cousin, she said lightly, don't be silly. Ideas float in the air. You don't own stitches or fabric. We grew up together, remember? What's yours is mine. Besides, you wouldn't have known what to do with them. I gave them life. Her words cut me deeper than any knife. What's yours is mine, as if years of my hard work could be brushed aside with a laugh. I stood there, stunned, unable to reply. She leaned in, kissed my cheek, and whispered, "Be happy for me. You know I couldn't have done this without you." Then she walked out, leaving me shaking. I spent that night crying into my pillow, muffling my sobs so no one would hear. My trust had been broken beyond repair. It was not just the work she had taken. It was the way she had dismissed me, as if my effort meant nothing, as if my only role was to hand her the tools to shine. But life does not stop for broken hearts. I still had to work, still had to earn my living. So I kept going though my joy dimmed. I no longer shared my sketches freely. I hid my notebooks under lock and key. I stitched for customers, quietly, never speaking of the dreams I once had. Every time Clara's name was mentioned, I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded politely. As the months turned into years, her star only rose higher. She moved to Chicago, then New York. Her face appeared in bigger magazines. She stood on stages, winning awards for her originality. I would see her pictures sometimes when I stood in line at the grocery store, the headlines shouting her success. It always felt like a punch to my chest. And yet, strangely, part of me also felt proud. She was family after all. I had loved her once like a sister. To see her standing tall, even on the foundation of my stolen work, stirred a strange mixture of pain and pride in me. I could not untangle the two, but the hardest trial was not over yet. One year, the company I worked for in town decided to hold a special exhibition of Wisconsin craft. They wanted to showcase local talent. Imagine my shock when they announced their guest of honor would be none other than Clara. The news spread like wildfire. Everyone was excited. They spoke of how wonderful it would be to see one of our own return, now famous. My stomach twisted at the thought. I knew that when she came, she would be surrounded by people praising her, cheering for her, blind to the truth that she had built her house on my stones. That week before the event was the longest of my life. I debated whether to go or stay away. Part of me wanted to avoid the pain of seeing her steal the spotlight yet again. But another part of me whispered that perhaps it was time for me to face her in the open, not just in kitchens and whispers. I did not know then how much that decision would change the path of my life. The night of the exhibition came faster than I expected. All week, the town had been buzzing with excitement. Posters went up announcing a celebration of local talent with Clara's smiling face printed right in the center. People spoke her name with pride, as though she carried the whole state of Wisconsin on her shoulders. I tried to keep my head down at the fabric shop, folding bolts of cloth and measuring out thread for customers. But everywhere I turned, someone asked, "Are you going to the exhibition? Isn't it wonderful? Your cousin becoming so famous." Each question cut me like a sharp needle. I wanted to scream the truth, to tell them that it was my work behind her fame, but the words never reached my lips. What if they laughed? What if they thought I was bitter? Small towns remember bitterness more than they remember facts. And so I smiled faintly and said, "Yes, it's something." When the evening finally arrived, I dressed in my plainest Sunday clothes. I told myself I would only sit quietly in the back, watch from a distance, and then slip away before anyone noticed me. But deep down, I think I knew something inside me was breaking, and it needed to face the fire. The hall was decorated with ribbons and lights, and tables were filled with pies, cookies, and coffee for the guests. People filled every corner, their voices buzzing with anticipation. Then, right on time, Clara walked in. She looked radiant in a tailored dress that shimmered under the lights. Her hair styled perfectly, her smile wide and confident. The crowd burst into applause the moment they saw her, and she waved like a queen returning to her kingdom. I stood at the back, my heart pounding. She had always been pretty, but now she carried herself like someone who believed she belonged above us all. And yet, behind the shine, I could see the same cousin who used to sit with me on the porch, braiding corn husks and laughing about silly things. That memory twisted the knife deeper. The speeches began. The organizer praised Clara as an inspiration for all of Wisconsin, a shining example of creativity and determination. Then Clara took the stage. Her voice was smooth, practiced, full of charm. She spoke about her journey, about how ideas had always come naturally to her, even as a child. I felt my fists clench when she said, "I used to spend nights sketching designs, driven by a passion to create beauty." Those were my nights she was talking about. My passion, my sketches. Then came the display. On stands around the hall were her so-called original works. Quilts, dresses, curtains, all carefully arranged. My stomach turned as I walked closer. Each piece was mine. I knew every stitch, every pattern, every fold. One quilt had even been sewn with a mistake I remembered making years ago, a crooked corner that I had tried to correct but never could. I had laughed at it then, calling it my quirky quilt. And now here it was, displayed as Clara's masterpiece. I pressed my hand to my chest to steady myself. Tears burned in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I looked around at the crowd. They marveled, pointing at the pieces, whispering about her genius. Some even called her the pride of Wisconsin. Not a single person suspected the truth. As I stood there, one woman beside me exclaimed, "Isn't she brilliant? Imagine coming from a little town like ours and making it so big." Something inside me cracked. For years, I had swallowed the pain, stayed silent, let Clara's star rise while mine was buried. But in that moment, with my crooked quilt staring back at me, I knew I could not stay silent any longer. I walked slowly toward the stage, my knees weak, but my heart stronger than it had ever been. Clara was shaking hands and laughing with people when she saw me. For a split second, her smile faltered. She knew why I had come, but then she quickly masked it, throwing her arms open. "Cousin," she cried, loud enough for all to hear, "how wonderful of you to come." The room turned, every eye landing on me. My hands trembled, but I forced myself to stand tall. I looked at Clara, then at the crowd, and my voice, though shaky, rang clear. "These are my designs," I said. A hush fell over the room. People blinked, confused. Clara let out a nervous laugh. "Oh, cousin, you're too modest. You've always been such an inspiration to me." But I shook my head. "No," I said louder this time. "These are mine. Every pattern, every stitch, every quilt. I made them in my room, night after night." She took them. She took my work and called it hers. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some looked at Clara, some at me, unsure whom to believe. Clara's smile stiffened, her charm faltering. She quickly grabbed my hand and squeezed it hard, whispering through clenched teeth, "Not here." Don't ruin this for us. But it was too late. The truth was spilling out. Years of silence breaking all at once. I pulled my hand away and spoke to the crowd. I have notebooks filled with sketches going back years. Many of these pieces were made in my home by my hands. If you look closely, you'll see mistakes only I could know. This quilt here, I pointed at the crooked corner quilt. I called it my quirky quilt. I remember the day I made it. I laughed about it. How would she know that? Unless she had taken it from me. Whispers grew louder. People turned to Clara, their admiration fading into suspicion. Her face flushed red, and for the first time, she seemed lost for words. I stood there, my chest heaving, my heart raw but free. After years of silence, I had finally spoken the truth. Whether they believed me or not, I knew I had reclaimed my voice. And though Clara tried to laugh it off, tried to charm her way through, something had shifted in that hall. The perfect image she had built began to crack. And I, though still trembling, knew this was only the beginning of what was to come. After that night in the exhibition hall, the air in our little town was never the same. When I walked home, my steps felt heavy, but my heart, my heart felt lighter than it had in years. For the first time, I had spoken the truth aloud. I had not let Clara silence me, not let her bury my work under her smile and lies. But I also knew the road ahead would not be easy. Truth is a strange thing. It does not always bring peace right away. Sometimes it stirs up storms before the calm arrives. The very next day, whispers ran through town. Some neighbors came to me quietly saying, "We believe you. We always knew your work had something special in it. We've seen you stitching late into the night. Those quilts have your hands all over them." Their words gave me strength. But others looked at me with narrowed eyes. "Are you sure, dear?" one woman asked at the fabric store. "Clara is so talented. Maybe you're just confused." That cut me deeper than I can explain. To have your life's work stolen is one pain, but to be doubted on top of it is another wound altogether. Clara, of course, tried to smooth everything over. She stayed in town for a few more days, smiling, laughing, acting as though nothing had happened. To anyone who asked, she would say, "Oh, my cousin just got carried away. She's always been so creative, and sometimes she feels left out. But really, she's my inspiration." Those words made me burn inside. She twisted the story to make herself look generous, as if she were doing me a favor by giving me crumbs of her spotlight. Our family was split in two. Some of them came to my side. My mother, God rest her soul, had always known the hours I put in. She told anyone who would listen I saw her work. I saw the notebooks. Clara may have the charm, but my daughter has the talent. My father, quiet as always, simply put his hand on my shoulder one evening and said, "Don't let them silence you again." That was all, but it was enough to steady me. But others in the family weren't so supportive. My aunt, Clara's mother, defended her fiercely. "How dare you accuse her of stealing? She worked hard for everything she has. You're just jealous." She cried at me during Sunday dinner, her voice sharp enough to split glass. Even some cousins sided with Clara, dazzled by her success and the glamour she carried from the city. To them, she was proof that someone from our humble town could rise high. They didn't want to believe that rise had been built on betrayal. For a while, I kept to myself. I went to work, came home, and sewed quietly. I felt both proud for speaking the truth and ashamed for causing such a storm. My heart carried both relief and sorrow tangled together. I would lie awake at night wondering, had I done the right thing? Would people ever see me as more than just the bitter cousin? Clara must have felt the walls closing in a little, because soon after, she left town in a hurry. She claimed she had urgent business in Chicago, but I knew she was running from the whispers. Still, she did not give up her act. In the weeks that followed, I saw new magazine articles about her. She gave interviews, carefully chosen words that made her sound like a self-made star. And whenever she mentioned family, she always painted herself as the generous one, lifting others up. Never once did she admit the truth. But something had shifted since that exhibition. People who once praised her without question now looked at her work a little differently. A few customers in town started asking me again for quilts and dresses, saying, "We'd rather have the real thing." It was a small thing, but it meant the world to me. It told me that even if the whole world chose to believe her, there would always be a few who saw my truth shining through. Still, it wasn't easy. Some nights, doubt gnawed at me. I would sit by my sewing table, staring at my notebooks, wondering if I should have just stayed quiet. Clara had power, charm, and connections in the big city. What did I have? A small room, calloused hands, and designs that no one beyond town seemed to care about. I thought about giving up more times than I can count. But then one evening, a young girl from down the street came to visit. She was holding a quilt I had made for her mother years ago, the corners worn from use. She looked up at me with big eyes and said, "My mama says you're the best maker in town. I want to learn from you." Those words pierced straight through my despair. In her eyes, I was not forgotten. In her eyes, I was not second best. I was a teacher, a creator, someone to look up to. That night, I lit my lamp and opened a fresh notebook. I began sketching again, not for magazines, not for fame, not even to prove anything to Clara. I sketched for myself. I sketched because the work was mine, because it gave me life, because it was my gift. And deep down, I knew that no matter how many designs she stole, she could never take the wellspring of ideas that flowed inside me. But Clara wasn't finished with me. A few months later, word came that she was planning a grand fashion show in New York, with many of her designs on display. Invitations were sent far and wide, even to me. At first, I laughed bitterly. Why would she invite me? To gloat? To humiliate me further? But then another thought crept in. Perhaps this was my chance. Perhaps it was time to step out of the shadows once and for all, to prove to the world that I was the true hand behind the work. I did not yet know how I would do it, but as I folded the invitation and slipped it into my drawer, I felt a spark inside me. For the first time in years, I was not just a victim. I was preparing for something bigger. And so, dear, the stage was being set, not in Wisconsin this time, but in New York City, where truth and lies would meet head-on. The invitation to Clara's fashion show sat in my drawer for weeks, whispering to me every time I opened it. At first, I thought I would simply ignore it. After all, what business did I have in New York City? I was just a small-town woman from Wisconsin with calloused hands and plain dresses. New York was a place of lights, noise, and people with pockets deep enough to buy gowns I could never dream of affording. But the longer I let it sit there, the more something inside me began to stir. Clara had already taken so much: my designs, my recognition, even my peace of mind. If I stayed behind, if I let her keep shining unchecked, wasn't I letting her win again? I thought about the crooked quilt, about the girl who had come to me wanting to learn, about the people in my town who whispered that they believed me. I thought about my mother's firm voice saying, I saw her work with my own eyes. One evening, after a long day at the fabric store, I pulled the invitation from the drawer and held it in my hands. The paper was thick, expensive, with golden letters spelling out, Clara Whitfield Presents, a celebration of original design. My jaw tightened at the word original. I pressed the card to my chest and whispered, "No more hiding." That was the night I decided I would go. Traveling to New York was no small thing for me. I had never been so far from home. I saved every penny from the shop, skipped small comforts, and even sold a few of my older quilts to raise the money. The train ride was long, the city loud and overwhelming when I arrived. But in the middle of all that chaos, I carried something Clara could never steal, the truth and the notebooks full of proof. I packed 3 of them in my bag, the oldest ones with dates and sketches that matched the designs she flaunted as hers. The evening of the fashion show, I stood outside the Grand Hall, feeling terribly out of place. Ladies in silk gowns and men in sharp suits streamed past me, their laughter filling the air. I smoothed my plain dress, the best one I owned, and tightened my grip on my bag. My hands trembled, but my heart whispered, "Stand tall." Inside, the hall glittered with chandeliers. Rows of chairs faced the runway, and everywhere people buzzed about Clara, the rising star. Photographers flashed their cameras, and when Clara finally appeared, the room erupted with applause. She wore a sparkling gown, her hair perfectly styled, her smile wide as ever. She looked every inch the queen of the night. I slipped into a seat near the back, my bag heavy on my lap. As the show began, models walked the runway wearing dresses and quilts that made the crowd gasp in admiration. But for me, each step they took felt like a dagger. I recognized every stitch, every fold. They were my designs paraded before the world as though they had been born in Clara's imagination. When the show ended, Clara took the stage again. "These designs," she said, her voice smooth, "are the fruit of my years of hard work and endless nights of creativity." Applause thundered through the hall. My heart pounded so loud I thought it might burst. I knew if I stayed silent, she would leave with all the glory once again. So I rose to my feet. My voice shook at first, but the words came out strong enough to cut through the clapping. "They're not yours," I said. The hall fell silent. Heads turned. Clara's eyes locked on mine, her smile faltering for just a second. "Excuse me," she said, still trying to sound gracious. "They're not yours," I repeated louder this time. "These designs are mine. Every one of them. You took them from me." Gasps rippled through the audience. Whispers filled the air. A man in the front row muttered, "What's going on?" Clara's face flushed, but she quickly regained her charm. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said with a laugh, "this is my dear cousin. She's always been such an inspiration to me. Sometimes she forgets the difference between inspiration and creation." But I stepped forward, pulling the notebooks from my bag. My hands trembled, but I held them high. "These are my notebooks," I said, my voice growing steadier with every word. "I've been sketching these designs since I was a girl. They're dated, signed, and filled with the very patterns you see tonight. Look closely. You'll find mistakes here that match the ones in her gowns. That crooked quilt corner, that was mine. The embroidery on that blue dress, I stitched it years ago. I have proof, and it's all here." The crowd stirred uneasily. A few people craned their necks to see the notebooks. Reporters scribbled furiously in their pads. Clara's smile grew tighter, her eyes flashing with panic for just a moment before she masked it again. "Don't be ridiculous," she snapped, her charm cracking under the pressure. "You're embarrassing yourself." But I didn't back down. No, I said firmly. For years, I stayed quiet while you took credit for my work. Not anymore. This is the truth. And whether this crowd believes it tonight or not, I won't be silent again. The room buzzed with tension. Some people began to murmur in support of me. Others looked at Clara with doubt in their eyes. A few even stood up, asking to see the notebooks. The tide was turning, and Clara knew it. In the chaos, I felt something rise inside me, something stronger than anger, stronger than sorrow. It was my dignity, returning after years of silence. I had spoken the truth, and I could see in Clara's eyes that she was afraid of it. When the evening finally ended, reporters surrounded me, asking questions, flipping through my notebooks. Clara slipped away through a side door, her head held high, but her steps quick and unsteady. For once, she could not charm her way out. I walked back to my small hotel room that night with aching feet and a tired body, but my spirit was alive. I didn't know what the newspapers would print the next morning, or whether the world would believe me, but I knew this much. I had planted a seed of doubt in their minds, and I had spoken the truth in the very place Clara thought she was untouchable. And, dear, sometimes the truth takes time to grow, but once planted, it cannot be uprooted so easily. The morning after the fashion show, I woke up in my small New York hotel room with the city, noise pouring in through the window. For a moment, I almost forgot where I was. Then the memory of the night before hit me like a storm. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding, wondering if I had done something foolish or brave, or maybe both. I brewed the weak coffee that came with the room and walked down to the corner shop to buy a newspaper. When I unfolded the paper, my breath caught. There, on the front page of the art section, was Clara's face, smiling as always, but right beside it was another headline. Designer's cousin claims fashion show designs were stolen. My knees almost buckled. They had printed it, not just as gossip, not tucked away in a corner, but right there for all to see. Some papers wrote the story neutrally, saying it was a family dispute that needed more evidence, but others dug deeper. A few reporters had spoken to me after the show, flipping through my notebooks. One even printed a side-by-side comparison of my old sketches and Clara's runway gowns. The resemblance was undeniable. The phone at the hotel rang all day with journalists wanting more of the story. My hands shook as I answered, unsure if I should even speak. Some were kind, asking gently about my work. Others were sharp, trying to catch me in contradictions. It was overwhelming, and for a woman like me, used to the quiet rhythm of Wisconsin life, it felt like being thrown into the middle of a storm. Clara, of course, did not stay silent. She gave interviews of her own, denying everything. She told reporters I was a bitter cousin who always wanted fame but never had the talent. She called me jealous, unstable, and said my claims were ridiculous. Reading her words in the papers stung worse than anything. Not only had she stolen my work, now she was trying to steal my good name too. But, dear, lies have a way of cracking when truth presses hard enough. The more Clara denied, the more reporters started digging. One journalist traveled to Wisconsin, visited my little home, and saw the piles of notebooks stacked neatly in my cupboard. He interviewed neighbors who remembered me sewing late into the night, customers who still had quilts I had made years before. Bit by bit, the pieces came together. Back in New York, lawyers began sniffing around. A few even offered to represent me, saying I had grounds for a legal case. At first, the idea terrified me. Courtrooms, judges, documents. I knew nothing of those things. All I knew was how to stitch a straight line and pour my soul into fabric. But after years of silence, I was learning something new about myself. I had a backbone stronger than I thought. If Clara wanted to fight, then fight I would. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Clara's supporters called me a liar. Strangers sent cruel letters, accusing me of trying to ruin a successful woman out of jealousy. But there were others too, people who wrote kind words, telling me they believed me, telling me to stay strong. One letter came from a seamstress in Chicago who said, "Don't give up. You're fighting for all of us whose work is stolen by those with smoother words and prettier faces." That letter I kept folded in my apron pocket. Every time doubt crept in, I touched it and remembered I wasn't alone. When the case finally went to court, the weight of it nearly crushed me. Clara walked in with her head high, dressed in fine clothes, surrounded by lawyers who spoke confidently. I walked in with trembling hands, clutching my notebooks. But when I took the stand, something steady rose up inside me. I spoke of my childhood, of the nights spent sketching by lamplight, of the crooked quilt corner, of the way Clara would slip sketches into her bag. I showed the notebooks, page after page, my handwriting, my dates, my mistakes, and my designs. Clara tried to laugh it off, but under the sharp questions of the lawyers, her charm cracked. She could not explain why so many of my dated sketches matched her supposed originals. She could not explain why certain flaws in my work appeared in her finished products. The courtroom murmured when the truth became clear. Weeks later, the ruling came. The court acknowledged that much of Clara's work had indeed come from mine. She was ordered to pay damages, though money never mattered much to me. What mattered was the truth being spoken aloud, not just by me, but by the law itself. My name was cleared. My work was finally recognized as my own. Clara's career, of course, suffered. The magazines stopped calling her a rising star. Companies hesitated to work with her. She tried to rebuild, but the shine was gone. Trust, once broken, is hard to mend, even in the world of glitter and glamour. As for me, life did not suddenly turn into riches or fame. I returned to Wisconsin, to my little home and my sewing table. But something inside me had changed forever. I was no longer the quiet cousin in the shadows. I was a woman who had spoken the truth, stood her ground, and fought for her life's work. And people noticed. Orders for my quilts began to grow, not just from neighbors, but from strangers who had read about me in the papers. Young girls came to me, asking to learn. For the first time, I opened my doors to teach, sharing not just my stitches, but the story of why it mattered to fight for your own creations. I will not pretend it was all easy. Some wounds never fully heal. Clara and I never spoke again, not really. She drifted farther from the family, and though sometimes I miss the cousin I thought I had, I know now that the bond was broken long before that exhibition. But as I sit by my sewing table now, years later, I feel a quiet peace. I may never have the glamour of New York, but I have something far greater. The knowledge that I stood up for myself. My work carries my name, my spirit, and no one can ever steal that again. Time has a way of softening even the sharpest edges of pain, though the scars remain to remind us of what we endured. After the court case, after the reporters stopped calling, after Clara's name faded from the papers, I returned to my ordinary life in Wisconsin. But it was not the same ordinary life as before. Something inside me had shifted, like a window had opened to let in a new kind of light. For so many years, I had lived quietly, content to create in the shadows. My joy came from the work itself, the colors, the stitches, the satisfaction of bringing an idea to life with my own two hands. Recognition had never seemed important. But I learned through bitter experience that sometimes recognition isn't about fame or glory. It is about protecting the truth of who you are. It is about standing tall and saying, "This is mine, I made it, and no one can take it from me." At first, neighbors whispered about the trial. Some thought I was brave. Some thought I had stirred up trouble. But over time, the whispers faded, and what remained was respect. People came to me not just for quilts or dresses, but for advice. Young women, especially, wanted to know how I had found the courage to stand up for myself. I told them the truth. Courage isn't born in grand moments. It comes quietly in small decisions, like refusing to be silent when your heart knows you must speak. I began teaching more seriously. On Saturday afternoons, my little living room filled with girls eager to learn how to cut patterns and stitch seams. I told them stories as we worked, about my childhood, about mistakes, about the time Clara and I made that crooked quilt together. They laughed, they listened, and they learned not only how to sew, but how to value their own work. Some of them went on to become designers, seamstresses, and artists. One even told me years later, "Because you fought for your work, I believed I could fight for mine." That was worth more than any prize or paycheck. As for Clara, I heard bits and pieces over the years. She tried to rebuild her career, but trust is a fragile thing in her world. Some family members tried to defend her, saying she was young and made mistakes. Others avoided talking about her altogether. For me, the anger slowly melted into something softer, sadness, maybe even pity. She had talent, yes, but she chose the easy path of taking rather than creating. And in doing so, she lost not only her reputation, but her family's trust and her own peace. Do I forgive her? That is a question I have asked myself many times. Forgiveness is not about saying what she did was right. It was wrong, deeply wrong. But forgiveness, I think, is about loosening the hold that bitterness has on your heart. If I carried that anger forever, it would have poisoned me more than it ever punished her. So in my own quiet way, I let it go, not for her sake, but for mine. Years rolled on, and life found its rhythm again. I traveled a little, showing my quilts at county fairs and craft shows. To my surprise, sometimes strangers recognized my name from those old newspaper stories. They shook my hand, told me they admired my courage. I smiled politely, though inside I always thought I only did what anyone should do when truth is stolen. But perhaps that is the lesson, dear. Not everyone does. Some stay silent, some let others take credit, because speaking up feels too hard, too risky. And I understand that. Oh, I understand it well. But I also know now that silence can be its own kind of prison. Once you break it, even if your voice shakes, you set yourself free. Looking back, I do not see my story as one of tragedy, though it began with betrayal. I see it as a story of survival, of learning to stand tall when someone tried to make me small. My cousin took credit for my life's work. Yes, but she could not take the heart that made the work possible. That heart still beats in me, and in every quilt I sew, in every girl I teach, in every truth I speak. When I sit now in my rocking chair by the window, the afternoon light spilling across my sewing table, I sometimes run my fingers over those old notebooks. The pages are worn, the pencil marks faded, but they are proof of a life lived with purpose. Proof that no matter who tries to claim your work, your truth cannot be erased. And you know, I've come to believe something else too. Success is not measured by applause or headlines. True success is when you can look back at your life and know you stayed true to yourself. I stayed true, even when it cost me comfort, even when it brought me pain. And because of that, I have peace. So if you remember nothing else from my story, remember this. Guard your work, guard your heart, and never let anyone make you believe your voice does not matter. Speak your truth, even if it trembles. For your life's work, whatever it may be, is yours alone. And that, dear, is something no one can ever steal.
Welcome to the new era of video creation.